Okay, we're going to integrate what's known as product to sum trigonometric integrals. What you see here is two functions that are multiplied together. There are two trigonometric functions multiplied together. So this is our product here. And like we discussed in class, this is not going to be by integration by parts, which is another type of integration formula format that we use to integrate a product of functions. This is a product of two trig functions, and they are sine functions. Now, we're going to look at some examples here of how to do this. In order to integrate a product, like in this example, we're going to have to use the appropriate product to sum identity. Okay, and we have four of them here. So we know that we have sine A and sine B here. So we're going to use the first one here because we have two sine functions multiplied together. And in this case, we're going to have x here and we're going to have 2x. So maybe we should write that a little bigger. So we have this x. We have 2x. That means I have 1/2 cosine A minus B minus cosine A plus B. So here's my x, here's my 2x, here's the x, and here's the 2x. So when I write my product now as a sum, this sum now becomes 1/2 cosine x minus 2x minus cosine x plus 2x. So I'm going to replace my product here using this particular identity, that first one, and now let's notice what this reduces to. We have 1/2 cosine minus x minus cosine of 3x. And we're also going to use another important idea here. Let's go back here. This is minus x. We know that cosine is, if we look at this minus x, cosine is a nice even function. And what that means is cosine of minus x is the same as cosine of x. So we can simplify this even further. I'm going to distribute. This now becomes cosine x minus 1/2 cosine 3x. So my integral is now going to be what I see here. It's now written as a sum, technically a difference, or adding a negative, still a sum. So this here is my sum, if you want to think of it that way. Okay, so now what we can do is use properties of integration. So I'm going to integrate cosine. I'm going to integrate cosine here of 3x dx. So the first integral is simple to do. That integral is just going to be sine. I'm going to have to use u substitution for the second integral, where u will be 3x. And then that means, yes, du would be 3 dx. And of course, you guys know that dx becomes du over 3. So this integral now is really 1/3 sine 3x. Okay, so all together, let's keep in mind we have some constants here. We have 1/2 sine x minus 1/2 times 1/3 sine 3x plus c. So my final answer is going to be 1/2 sine x minus 1/6 sine 3x plus c. And this is how we integrate a product of two sine and cosine curves, or in this case two sine curves, but we're going to do the others. We're going to use what's called the product to sum formulas here to enable us to integrate our functions now. So here's one example. Let's give you an example here. If they give us maybe sine of 4x sine 3x dx. So here's an example where if I write my x's a bit more noticeable, we're going to use the same exact product to sum, because again we have a product of two sine functions. We're going to use the same exact formula. Let's go back here. 4x and 3x. So if I use the same formula, 4x, 3x, 4x, 3x, 4x, 3x, looks like I'll have here just x, and I'll have 7x here. So these are my new arguments of my cosine curves, x and 7x. Okay, 1/2 cosine x minus cosine 7x. Okay. 1/2 cosine x minus cosine 7x. So I can actually distribute now if I want and say, okay, I have integral of, this will be 1/2 cosine x minus 1/2 cosine of 7x. Right? And we're integrating. Properties of integrals. 1/2 the integral of cosine x dx minus 1/2 the integral of cosine of 7x dx. And these are two integrals. Properties of integration. So take a look. Maybe we'll use, again here, I'm going to have to integrate, oops, let's get some highlights. Cosine dx, I have to integrate cosine 7x. The first integral is just sine. My second integral, we have to use u sub here, where u is 7x, du is 7 dx, and now dx becomes du over 7. So this integral now will be 1/7 sine 7x. So altogether, let's put this again here. We have 1/2 sine x minus 1/2 times that 1/7 sine 7x, and let's add our constant. 1/2 sine x minus 1/14 sine 7x plus that c. And here you are. Here's another example of a product to sum. Not too difficult. So if you start with a product, you're going to use the appropriate product to sum formula, and you're going to be able to now integrate. Another example. We're going to integrate now cosine 2x, cosine maybe 5x dx. So again, we start with a product of cosines. We're going to have to use the appropriate product to sum formula. So let's go back here. And we're going to now use here, oops, cosine 2x cosine 5x. So there's a 2x here, there's a 5x here. We're going to replace that right inside for my a and b. 2x and 5x. Just like we did over here. So we get 2x minus 5x, and we get 2x plus 5x here. Now notice the difference here. This is plus, it's not minus. And this will become minus 3x, and this will become 7x. So we're going to use these as well. Okay? So let's see what this integral becomes. We got a minus 3x and we got a 7x. So minus 3x and a 7x. 1/2 cosine minus 3x plus cosine 7x. We're going to replace our product with this sum. Again, I want to remind everybody that cosine is a nice even function, so that cosine minus 3x is the same as cosine of 3x. 1/2 cosine 3x plus cosine 7x. Okay. This is what we're going to have to integrate, but let's actually distribute first. I get 1/2 cosine of 3x plus 1/2 cosine of 7x. So when I integrate this sum, we're going to use properties. 1/2 the integral cosine 3x dx plus 1/2 the integral cosine 7x dx. In both cases, we use u sub. U here will be 3x. Du is 3 dx, or dx is du over 3. U sub over here means u is 7x. Du is 7 dx, or we say dx is du over 7. We're going to integrate these functions here. So what we end up with now is going to be, let's integrate these. I want to remind you guys, this becomes 1/3 sine 3x, and this is 1/7 sine 7x. So we have 1/2 times that 1/3 sine 3x plus a 1/2 times 1/7 sine 7x, and let's add our constant. We end up with 1/6 sine 3x plus 1/14 sine 7x plus that constant. And here you go. Here is the product to sum formula in action when you multiply two cosine functions. Let's look at another example. We have cosine maybe 4x times cosine of x dx. Okay, again, product of two functions, product of two cosine functions. So we're going to use our product to sum formula. We got 4x and x now. So this is how this will change. We have a 4x here. We have an x. 4x minus x. 4x plus x. This becomes 3x. This becomes 5x. So this will be 1/2 cosine 3x plus cosine 5x. Cosine 3x plus cosine 5x. Let's distribute. So my integral is now going to become, because I have to integrate, by properties of integration, 1/2 the integral cosine of 3x dx plus 1/2 the integral of cosine 5x dx. Again, two integrals to integrate. So let's actually change this color here. I'm not very organized with my colors this weekend here. These are the two integrals we have to integrate. So I'm going to go back to the red and u sub here. We know u becomes 3x, du is 3 dx, dx will be du over 3. U sub u is 5x, du is 5 dx, dx will be du over 5. So that this integral here becomes 1/3 sine 3x, 1/5 sine 5x. So let's write everything down. 1/2 times 1/3 sine 3x plus 1/2 times 1/5 sine 5x plus our c. So here's our final answer. 1/6 sine 3x plus 1/10 sine 5x plus that c. And there you go. This is the product of two cosine curves, or cosine functions, sorry. So far we've seen in action our two product of sum formulas here. Product of two sines, product of two cosines. So let's look at an example now of sine times cosine. Let's look at the third one now. So let's focus on that. So sine times cosine. So you have sine 2x and just cosine x dx. Okay, so we got cosine 2x, sine x, and we're going to look at that third product of sum because we have here again a product. We have to write that as a sum. So 2x, x, this gives us 2x plus x. Let's write it clearly. I get a nice 3x. 2x minus x, I get a nice x. So I get 1/2 sine 3x plus, and again, this one has plus here, plus sine x. Sine 3x plus sine x. So here's my integration. I'm going to distribute now. I get 1/2 sine 3x plus 1/2 sine x. This is what I'm going to integrate. Properties of integration, 1/2 sine 3x dx. Let's go back. One-half integral of sine x dx. So the first integral, u sub, where u is going to be 3x, du is 3 dx, or dx will be du over 3. Let's get back to the computer here. All right. Now, let's notice here we have these integrals. And the last one I can say to you guys, this is minus cosine, right? Because let's remember that the derivative of cosine is minus sine. So there's that negative factor. So I'm going to have to differentiate minus cosine, and when I do, I get a sine. So the antiderivative of sine is a minus cosine. So we're going to use this fact. That's where it comes from. Now over here, what that means is I'll have a minus 1/3 cosine 3x by my u substitution. So you guys can try that out. Altogether, we have, let's write it together now, 1/2 times negative 1/3 cosine 3x plus 1/2 times the negative cosine of x plus that c. So I get a negative 1/6 cosine 3x. Let's put this in a final answer format. Let's color that black. Okay. Minus 1/6 cosine 3x minus 1/2 cosine x plus RC. You are done. So this is what we have when we have a sine times cosine. Let's try one more. Sine 8x, cosine, let's say, is 12x dx. Sine 8x, cosine 12x. So let's go to 8x and 12x. Let's go back to that third formula. 8x and 12x. 8x plus 12x, 8x minus 12x. So we get 20x and we get negative 4x. Okay, good. We're going to talk about what this means here. So let's go back and erase these here. It's not used anymore. Sine 8x cosine 12x gives you 1/2 sine 20x plus sine negative 4x. So 1/2 sine plus sine 20x and negative 4x. So when we distribute, we get 1/2 sine 20x. Oops. Looks like you already did distribute. Slow down. 1/2 sine negative 4x. Now let's be clear over here with what's going on. Sine of your negative 4x here. Now because sine is an odd function. Let's write this here. Sine is odd. What that means is sine of that negative 4x can be replaced with minus sine of positive 4x. So this is going to be sine of 4x, and that's because sine is odd. Okay. So I end up with 1/2 sine of your 20x minus 1/2 sine of your 4x. This is what I'm going to integrate. So I'll have 1/2 integral sine 20x dx minus 1/2 integral sine 4x dx. Now for both of these, you use u sub. U here is 20x, so du becomes 20 dx, or my dx is du over 20. U here is 4x, du is 4 dx, so dx becomes du over 4. So we're going to do both of these by u sub. This is what I'm going to determine here, these integrals. So let's remember here, this will be 1 over 20, and it'll be negative cosine 20x. This would be negative 1 over 4 cosine of 4x by u substitution. So when I enter everything now here, let's be careful with our constants. I got 1/2 times negative 1 over 20 cosine 20x minus 1/2 times 1 over 4 cosine 4x. Don't forget to add your constant c. Doing some arithmetic here, we get negative 1 over 40 cosine of 20x minus 1 over 8 cosine 4x plus that c. And so this here is our final answer for this integral. Okay, let's take a look if we do something kind of similar but a little different. Let's look at the last formula. That's going to be this product here of cosine times sine. So we're going to look at this last situation. And cosine sine. So let's come up with an integral here. Cosine sine. So if you have, for example, integral of cosine and maybe sine of, well, we'll say 4x again. Okay, again, you notice you have a product, and we have to use the product to sum identity. Okay, so cosine x sine 4x. So x and 4x. This portion is an x. Here's my 4x. I get x plus 4x, x minus 4x. So we'll have 5x here. Now I have negative 3x. This is what we're going to use. (5x) and negative 3x. Okay, and go back again and notice what's going on. You have a negative sign now. So here we had a positive sign. Now we have a negative sign, and it's both signs. So this is going to be our product to sum. So now we're going to have 1/2 sine 5x minus sine negative 3x. 1/2 sine 5x minus sine negative 3x. And yet again, I'm going to replace, well, let's do a few things here. Let's distribute, and I will replace, well, what happens now? Let's take a look at this. I read every detail here. sine, let's say 1/2 sine negative 3x. This gets replaced with minus sine of what? 3x. Here's your final answer. 1/2 sine 5x. This now becomes a plus 1/2 sine 3x because you have two negative signs. A minus times a minus makes that a plus. This is what you're going to integrate. So by properties of integrals, you get the following. One half times the integral of sine 5x dx plus 1/2 times the integral of sine 3x dx. Okay, let's write that a little nicer. We're now going to use u sub, where u here is 5x. We're going to use u sub, where u here is 3x. This means du becomes 5 dx. Du becomes 3 dx. This means dx is du over 5, and it means dx here is du over 3. So these integrals are what we're going to look at now. Here's what you get. Minus 1/5 cosine 5x minus 1/3 cosine 3x. So 1/2 multiplied to negative 1/5 cosine 5x plus 1/2 times negative 1/3 cosine 3x plus your c. Final answer. Negative 1/10 cosine 5x minus 1/6 cosine 3x plus c. You are done. So this here is how you integrate a cosine sine product. And we'll do one more, cosine sine product. This time we'll say the integral of cosine may be 7x sine 2x dx. So that's 7x sine, cosine 7x sine 2x now. Notice again you have this product here. 7x and 2x. Seven x plus 2x gives you 9x. 7x minus 2x gives you 5x. So this is going to be 1/2 sine 9x minus sine 5x. So it's sine 9x minus sine 5x. So when I distribute, I get 1/2 sine of 9x minus 1/2 sine of 5x. This is what we're going to integrate. So by properties of integration, we get 1/2 integral sine 9x dx minus 1/2 integral sine 5x dx. This is what I'm going to integrate. I'm going to use u sub, where now u is 9x, du is 9 dx, or dx is du over 9. U sub u is 5x, du is 5 dx, and dx gives you du over 5. This integral becomes negative 1/9 cosine 9x, negative 1/5 cosine 5x. 1/2 multiplied to negative 1/9 cosine 9x minus 1/2 multiplied to negative 1/5 cosine 5x. Don't forget to add your constant. Negative 1/18 cosine 9x plus 1/10 cosine 5x plus your constant c. And that is how you handle what we call product to sums. You essentially use the appropriate product to sum formula and you integrate.